Hey everybody, so today we're going to be talking about Age of Wonders 4, or more in particular, we're going to be talking about the cultures in Age of Wonders 4. I'm going to be going over all the different cultures, their strengths, their weaknesses, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to kind of put up a brief tier list. Don't really think this is only a tier list video, though. If you want to skip to the end and just see me write them on a list, great, that's fine. But I'm going to be going over every different culture and their strengths, weaknesses, all their different unit types, things like that. Because a lot of you guys have been asking me for guides to help you guys learn games like this. Some of you guys like watching guides. If you don't like Age of Wonders 4 at all, then maybe you could listen to this because I always make things interesting with the nerdy way I talk about things. So we're going to go through every culture. Now, as I did go through in my last video, I talked about this. If there's a little icon here, that means it comes from a DLC. The developers have actually done a pretty good job making sure anything that comes from a DLC is pretty obvious that it's coming from a DLC. So in base game, of course, will be Feudal, High, Barbarian, Industrious, Dark, and Mystic. Reaver comes from the Empire and Ashes expansion. Primal comes from Primal Fury, and Oathsworn comes from Ways of War. That's just to help you guys make sure, you know, if you're playing on the free weekend or if you just have the base game, it helps there. So up first, we have Feudal. Feudal is F tier, F for Feudal. Feudal is blatantly the worst culture in this game. It does absolutely nothing and it is miserable. If we highlight Feudal, we can see it is higher food income, which is technically correct. Any unit standing next to an ally is 20% damage, which is okay. Feudal Lord does not as much as you're thinking. Minus 20% upkeep is good, but that's their entire economy. The entire economy of Feudal is that their heroes give minus 20% upkeep to their army, which isn't bad, but it just means as I go through the other cultures, you're going to start seeing here rapidly that that's really not a lot, that what Feudal does is not really that much. If I go over the Feudal units, you're also going to see a pretty consistent issue here that every single Feudal unit is basically another culture's unit, but slightly weaker in some way. So first we have Peasant Pikeman, who is just a generic pikeman. 65 HP is pretty low for tier 1, especially for a melee. 2 defense, 1 resistance is not really great either. Its melee strike has no special effect, no shred, nothing like that. It's just a generic polearm unit. It is charge resist like a polearm unit. It does first strike like a polearm unit, and that's it. It's a pretty generic unit. Its one defining feature is it gets 20% more experience, and then if it becomes legendary, it becomes a defender. Why is this unit bad? Because it's really squishy. It can't survive focus fire. It dies constantly. You will have to frequently rebuy this unit. This actually goes into the problem with Feudal Lords. They get negative 20% upkeep to their army. But because they have no good front line until tier 2, this means they will constantly be losing pikemen and potentially archers if their pikemen can't hold, because their archers are really squishy as well. Their pikemen is squishy, their archer is squishy. They will be constantly using units and spending gold that they have to replace. The up to 2 gold that you save on a peasant pikeman will not be nearly enough because it's 60 gold just to replace a peasant pikeman. They're really bad. Their archer, of course, is, as I just mentioned, a low HP unit with 0 defense, 0 resistance, a generic unit with shoot bow. I think it's the only unit in the game that literally has no special feature whatsoever. It literally has no special feature. Okay, moving on to the defender, I would call this probably the best unit from the Feudal arsenal. Coming in here with 80 HP, 7 defense, 2 resistance. This is a fairly tanky unit. It also has a shield and 12 damage. So it's an average damage unit with pretty good stats. For tier 2, this is about average, but it has heavy shield, which gives 1 defense and 1 resistance against any attack that is not flanking it. Together with shield defense, that means this unit has 11 armor, or defense, or whatever you want to call that, from units from the front, as well as 3 resistance being attacked from the front. It's very tanky. As a shield unit, it's just pretty good. The only problem is this is just an average tier 2 unit. The best unit in Feudal is just a unit that is average. A unit that is averagely stat is the best unit for Feudal. If we look into the Bannermen, we can see that this unit, which was actually pretty good at the game launch, has been power creeped into the ground and is not really even that good anymore. It comes out with 14 damage, which is okay. It is a chance to sunder defense, which would be okay. I mean, I just want to show that the Archer and Defender have no special properties. He can, of course, sunder defense, which is okay. He's got 2 special abilities, neither of which are free actions. Bulwark Standard gives a single bolstered defense and bolstered resistance to adjacent friendlies. This is okay, but it's 1 resistance and 1 defense. Hypothetically, over the course of a game, it could keep defense and resistance up, and it could continuously reapply it, but for using a unit's entire turn, this is really not that good. Other units can get these as a free action. In case you wonder, I'm not joking. If we look at the Steel Shaper, we can see that grant defense, target friendly unit at range 4 gets 2 bolstered defense. This is a free action. You can just use this freely, and it does not end your turn. Whereas if we go back to Feudal, we can see the Bannerman has to actually end his turn to use a Bulwark Standard. It also makes everyone, they have to be adjacent to him to get the buff, so either he needs to run up to allies, in which case he's getting AoE'd, or your turn order needs to be really weird, in which case you're also probably going to get AoE'd. Soothing Standard is other ability. Now this ability would be good if not for one downside. It is cooldown 4. Now cooldowns in this game work in that that's 4 turns of not having the ability that you must go through. So it's usable once every 5 turns. You can heal once every 5 turns. Now it is an AoE heal, which would be good, and it does give morale, which would be good. But if we compare this to other units from other factions, for example, if we look at Barbarian, they have Invigorate, which does use all 3 actions. You can't move before using it, but it is an AoE. It can be used at range. It does make you clump up a little bit, but because the War Shaman can be used at range, it gives 10 hit points healing instead of 20, but it also gives Strengthened, and it also gives Regeneration, which would heal for 6 at the end of your turn, and then 6, and then 6. Strengthen, of course, increases the damage. War Shaman is not even particularly the best unit in the game, and its cooldown is 3 rather than 4. If we look over here at Oathsworn, Vowkeeper has an AoE heal right here. Yes, an AoE heal at range. Once again, it does use all those actions, but it can be used at range and just heals for 25 at range. The Feudal Bannerman just makes you clump up and is generally bad. The Knight is an overall outrageously bad unit, once again. It's just a generic tier 3 unit. It doesn't even have the 100 health that a lot of tier 3 units have. So it actually is below average health, only 3 defense, 3 resistance, so it's not particularly tanky either. Just an average status resist for a tier 3 unit. It is nothing outstanding about it whatsoever. Even its charge damage is 24. So once again, this is just average. The only unique effect this unit really has is it deals 40% more damage to large targets. Now, that can matter and that can be relevant. I'm not going to say it's not relevant. It can be relevant, and the later in the game you go, the more and more relevant that will actually get. So it does have a purpose and it can be good. The other effect it has is Inspiring Killer. This unit grants double the morale bonus to itself and its allies when killing an enemy. This isn't really that relevant. So we're talking about a unit which is really not that good. It's only as tanky as, for example, any generic tier 3 unit. A lot of tier 3 units are, well, actually the Awakener is, a lot of tier 3 units that could also be cavalry are actually tankier. The Bastion is a potential cavalry unit, meaning if you select a cavalry mount for your race, the Bastion would actually be mounted. It's not tankier. A lot of tier 3 units have 100 HP. It is 90, which is fine, I guess, like 93.3. It's not really tanky, so it can't really hold the front line. It will get absolutely shred to pieces by polearm units. It does average damage. It doesn't really do anything. Its most comparable target is Dark with the Dark Knight. The Dark Knight has the same tankiness, the same status resist. Cull the Weak, which is I would say Cull the Weak is probably a better effect than Stand Together, but the Dark Knight also has Dark Surge, which can AoE. Now, it does use all 3, but this means the Dark Knight can charge, and if it doesn't die immediately on the next turn, it can then Dark Surge and AoE enemies and deals double damage to enemies with negative status effect for massive damage, in fact. It doesn't have the 40% damage against large targets, but overall, the Dark Knight is literally just the Knight, but better. And that's it for the feudal units. There's nothing good about any of these. Its best unit is the defender, which I would call just an average tier 2 unit. Okay, next up we have High. High is pretty broken right now. Why is High pretty broken right now? Because the heroes get Twin Awakening. This was added with this recent update, and I will explain later on why every hero getting Twin Awakening for free has kind of made this faction broken. But for now, its buildings give city stability and knowledge. Knowledge is the best resource in the game, and city stability can be quite good. Units are strengthened with Awaken, revealing their hidden potential. Awakening, by default, gives 3 spirit damage, then depending on the unit, can do even more. You get plus 10 alignment, but it can be bad or good depending on what it is. Now, the alignment agenda. The High Culture has an alignment agenda, which grants bonuses if you hold your mouse over it properly for the following alignment levels. Pure Good gives you plus 25 stability in all cities. It's okay. It's not exactly blown my mind. It's not really even that good. If you can manage to keep yourself perfectly neutral, you get plus 10 food and production per city stability level above neutral in all cities. This can be really good. That's 10 food, 10 production, potentially multiple times. 20 food, 30 production. This can be really good. Pure Evil allows every single unit to start Awakened, which would just give you, your entire army, 3 spirit damage. Spirit damage is generally the best damage in the game, and as well as awakening everything, and their Awaken modifiers can be pretty good. Now let's talk about their units here for a second, because this might show why feudal units end up being so crap. So when we look at High, we can see, and I should mention one thing about feudal. I'm going to go back here really quick. The only thing that their scout has good is low maintenance. I forgot to mention that. It was so irrelevant. I forgot to mention that. But let's go to High. Now, the scout for High has greater farsight, granting it plus 2 vision range. Instead of plus 1 vision range, it is plus 2. Generally, way better. The Dusk Hunter is, of course, just as good. In every single way, it is just as good as the Feudal Archer, but it also gets Dormant Seeking Arrows. When awakened, this unit gets Awakened Seeking Arrows for plus 1 range. Now, it doesn't get the plus 20% damage from being adjacent to allies, but plus 1 range is quite good, and High having Awakened will generally outperform the Feudal plus 20% damage anyway. This is just a generic unit. Coming in at tier 1, we have the Dawn Defender, one of the best units in the game. Why is it one of the best units in the game? It's tier 1, 75 HP is 5 more HP than a regular tier 1 melee unit. 5 defense, 0 resist is a pretty typical lineup for melee shield units. Shield defense is plus 3 defense. That's just normal. Shield wall is normal. Everything's normal. It's stat completely like a normal tier 1 shield unit, except it also has 5 more HP. Except when it's awakened, it gets Shield of Light for 1 defense, 2 resist. This would make this unit as compared to the Feudal Defender. Once this unit is awakened, it has 1 less defense and 5 less health. This is a tier 1 unit compared to the Defender's tier 2. This comes out tier 1, and of course, it sits on the front line and it soaks damage. It means that High will generally, in early game battles, not really lose any units, because the enemies won't be able to get through the Dawn Defenders. That means even though your Dusk Hunters are really squishy, it won't matter because nothing's going to get through the Dawn Defenders anyway. High will generally never really have to replace any of their units, which allows their economy to be put not into replacing units, but instead just churning out buildings, and that's it. This gives High just baseline an insane economical advantage over other factions because they just never have to replace any units. And coming to Sun Priest, now this is their tier 2 unit. It is a free action Twin Awakening. Now, I did mention every High hero got Twin Awakening for free. Now, Twin Awakening is a free action that awakens 1 unit and then a second unit within 2 hexes. This means that the 3 heroes that High have can keep 6 units awakened permanently and 9 every other turn. This is quite overpowered and seriously needs to be reconsidered. It just allows High to basically keep everyone awakened if they even have like a couple extra priests. But the Sun Priest has Twin Awakening, which is a free action ability. It either gives people damage or awakens their abilities or etc. Spirit Blast does 16 damage, which is pretty high for a tier 2 unit. It has no additional effects on it, but just doing more damage is generally good. It is Mending Awakening. Now this is cooldown 2, so this can be used every 3 turns. It heals an ally for 30 hit points and awakens them for 3 rounds. So it can Twin Awakening, awaken 2 units, then heal a unit and awaken a 3rd unit. The Sun Priest can keep a lot of people awakened. And it's not like crazy healing, it's just every 3 turn it heals 1 unit for 30, which is still pretty decent. When it is awakened, its base magic attacks now have a 60% chance of inflicting Distracted. Distracted makes all attacks targeting that unit flanking. Flanking means that it takes plus 25% damage. I know this might seem complicated, but basically, when this guy is awakened, which he often just will be for free, because every unit in this game just gets to be awakened, it will hit for 16 damage instead of the 14 damage from the Bannermen, and if it does manage to distract an enemy, all attacks, even from the front, will get plus 25% damage. That makes this a very powerful unit, especially because Twin Awakening is just a free action. Now, do remember that you'll get plus 3 damage, so it's a very deadly unit. Daylight Spear is a I'm gonna call this a pretty good spearman. Now it has 3/3 stats, which is pretty good, only 75 HP, but this unit is only tier 2. So for a tier 2 unit, I would say it's already decently tanky for being a spearman. 14 damage is pretty good. That's slightly above average. At tier 2, the average damage is 12, so this unit is 14. It counts as a polearm unit, which gives it the general polearm unit stats: first strike, charge resist, and more damage against cavalry and large targets. Now, this unit gets Dormant Awakening. Now, when it gets Dormant Awakening, it gets +1 retaliation attack. Now, +1 retaliation means when it gets attacked, it can hit an enemy twice instead of just once. In combination with the first strike, and in combination with how much damage it will do when awakened, 14 and then +3, this will mean hitting Daylight Spears with melee just kills you. You generally can, you almost basically take more damage hitting a Daylight Spear than dealing to a Daylight Spear. If you're a cavalry unit, you can practically just kill yourself on a Daylight Spear. These units have formed the foundation of many high compositions because they're just really hard to break apart with melee. They can be a bit weak to range, obviously, because they don't have a shield. Do remember that the shield units generally have 5 defense, then 3 more defense from the front. So this unit would have 8 defense if it's getting shot from the front, whereas a Daylight Spear would have a mere 3. So it can be shot down much easier, but because it has 3 resistance, this means that magical AoEs or magical attacks, or if anyone has enchanted their units to have magic damage, the Daylight Spear will actually be tankier than a shield unit. At either rate, the Daylight Spear is just quite good. The Awakener doesn't exactly wow me. It's okay. A 12 repeating spirit damage, because do remember, spirit damage is the best damage in the game. It of course gets Radiant Light, which allows it to distract enemies, so it can kind of be a debuffing kind of unit. It gets a free action Awaken, so it can awaken a single ally, which is probably what they need to change the high heroes to. Instead of Twin Awakening, just regular Awaken. That'd be a pretty good nerf. I'm gonna keep mentioning it because high right now is pretty overtuned. But the Spirit Bolts doesn't really do the most damage. I mean, it's 12, it's okay. Exposing Light can actually be pretty good. It's a 3 ability, but it's range 6, so it's a typical magical AoE. And it afflicts Sundered Defense and Sundered Resistance. Most of the time, these sorts of debuffs have a 90% chance to be inflicted, but this is 100%. So only Status Resist will reduce it. It's not exactly wowing, but it can, if you have like 1 in the back, it can hit enemies, you know, disorient clumps of enemies. Not like disorient in like a literal sense, in like a debuff of disorient. There's no disorient debuff. Maybe there is, I don't know. But I'm just saying it can punish enemies for overly clumping, and it can debuff their stats. So the high roster is just legitimately good. Dusk Hunter is just Archer, but can get more range. Dawn Defender is probably the best tier 1 unit, maybe, in the game, potentially. Sun Priest is fine. He's pretty good. The Twin Awakening and the Mending Awakening is good. Daylight Spear is incredible. Honestly, do not underestimate this unit. If you go this unit and later in the game, you can get the Cleansing Flame Tome. You can get a seriously amazing spear line. So in combination with having a strong economy and having an amazing roster, high is just really good right now. So this goes to Oathsworn. Oathsworn is the newest culture, and it's more complicated, and it's kind of a bit hard to rank. Oathsworn, of course, has 3 different mini factions that I'll talk about because they actually do change the game a lot. So here we have Harmony. Harmony's, well, I can go into this later. Harmony's main thing, well, oh boy, I need to start with the beginning. Oathsworn's main thing is that they generally get a higher draft income and they need devotion. Now, they get devotion from different actions, but the higher their devotion, the more buffs that they get. The higher their devotion, the more city stability they get flatline, as well as secondary buffs depending on which oath they go with. The Oath of Harmony can get Harmonize. When this unit drops below 60% of their maximum hit points, gain an effect based on their culture's devotion. So if you drop below 60% health, by default you'll heal 5, and as you increase your devotion and as you increase your devotion, you'll heal for slightly more. It's not incredible. The other ones are way better, but yeah, I mean it's not incredible, especially later in the game. 30 health is not incredible. Over your entire army it can be okay, but often there can be decay effects or just so much damage that 30 HP just really doesn't matter that much. It can be okay in certain compositions with certain strategies. It's kind of being like either an anti-AoE or like an anti-burst strategy. It can make it very hard to kill individual units because they keep healing for 30. So it's not useless, but let's just say the other ones are better. So their Oath of Harmony, they gain devotion. Oh boy, this is the nested tooltips are not liking me. They gain harmony by vassalizing another race, clearing infestations or ancient wonders, making truces, that means ending a war, forgiving the grievances that other nations have on you. They lose devotions if they ever start a war, or if they ever raise or culturally enrich another hostile city. So when you conquer a city, you can either conquer it as their race, or you can migrate your race in. That's considered an evil action, and also Harmony really hates it. And if you ever fabricate a grievance to go to war, they really, really hate that. Harmony then does not like going to war, ever. They can defend in wars just fine, but they cannot start their own war. This is very, very limiting, and basically restricts Harmony to hoping that other factions in the game declare war on you, or just going really tall and winning the game through just having really good knowledge generation and economy and things like that. Overall, I wouldn't say Harmony is that amazing. They're okay. Righteousness is interesting. They have outrageously big buffs here, just because. And also, okay, so Harmony does do 2 things. Free cities and other rulers like them more, which can be okay. When they vassalize a city, it starts as a higher vassalization phase, giving you more resources from them, and that's it. Righteousness gets no buffs by default, and negative alignment gain is doubled, so it only nerfs you by default. So then, is the buff of righteousness worth it? Well, yes, it very much can be. And as I go into their units, you'll see even more how much it can be. By default, just for being righteousness, you get +2 spirit damage on every unit forever, so long as you are not flanking. This culture can't flank. Basically, flanking on this culture gets +20. Flanking gives +25% damage, but because this nobility effect does not apply on flanking, you'll end up actually doing about the same damage. Now, if you break your oath, if you go with evil choices, and evil choices generally are the good ones, they end up way buffing you. So you can't go evil at all, or you'll do negative 20% damage and lose all your bonus damage. You're just inting yourself to death. So you cannot choose evil choices at all. But your bonuses for slowly getting more and more righteous are 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 total damage to your entire faction on every hit of the best damage type, Spirit. These are extremely powerful effects, and yeah, I mean, they're just extremely powerful effects. And I'll get into later how this can even get even better. Now, the Oath of Righteousness is just, you have to get good points and not have evil points. It's pretty simple. Be good, not evil, get big damage. Do you get it? Okay. Strife is, of course, a lot more complicated, and I'm not going to say it's weaker, but it's a little bit more complicated and it's easier to screw up. Very much easier to screw up. Okay. You get grievances against any ruler with an overall better ranking than you. So you can attack anyone who's stronger than you. Okay. Raising cities and pillagings takes -1 turn. Raising cities and pillaging yields Imperium. Imperium is the hardest to get, best resource in the game. And you have Warrior's Soul. What is Warrior's Soul? It's the same thing as Righteousness, but in fire damage. Fire damage, I would say, is fine. All elemental damage is fine. Fire damage tends to be the more resisted of all of them, I would say. But there's also times where it can be good. No elemental damage in this game is actually just weak. They've done a good job in ensuring that no elemental damage is just generally, like, countered. Even the poison damage, they don't, like, some people can resist poison, but they're not just going to allow poison damage to be terrible. So fire damage is still good. It's just, I would call it slightly weaker. So, of course, you got the 5, 4, 3, 2 damage. You just do a lot of fire damage. It can be quite good. Now, the Strife unit is not as good as the Righteousness unit, I would say. And I'll go into that later. Each culture has its own different unit type. So then the Oath of Strife is, as you imagine, generally entering a war, raising people, being evil. That will build up your oath. It's not good or evil points, but generally doing evil actions will build up your oath. You lose devotion by entering a truce. So if you ever end a war before killing someone, you lose devotion. If you ever make a defensive pact, you lose devotion. If you make an alliance, you lose a lot of devotion. If you ever vassalize anything, you lose, you guessed it, devotion. If you lose any of your cities, you lose devotion. So this faction has to declare war on everyone and be a permanent war and always be attacking people, and they can't try to vassalize cities. Even if you're a city cap, you can't vassalize a city, you just got to burn it to the ground. So Strife, it can be good because they do get buffs as compared to Righteousness, which needs to go only with good choices, which are generally much weaker. Good choices are just straight up weaker than evil choices. So you have to basically hinder yourself the entire game for a late game buff. Righteousness is very much a scaling faction. Strife, on the other hand, goes out the gate and is very powerful. Now, while, of course, then is Warrior's Soul weaker, because you only get base attacks deal extra damage when the attacker is not outnumbered. If the enemy ever outnumbers you, for some reason, then you deal less damage. Your damage turns off if you're ever outnumbered, which seems like it should actually be the opposite of that, but there you go. Whatever some of the opposites of you. Whenever you are not outnumbered, so if the enemy has less than you, oh my god, I just brain farted so hard. If the enemy has less units than you, your damage turns off. So you can't use anything like summons. After killing one enemy, you actually get less damage on the next attack. That's not a joke. So let's say you have an 18v18 battle. The first time you kill an enemy, you don't get bonus damage on the next enemies. They have to outnumber you. It's quite difficult to use this bonus damage. I say it's quite difficult. In fact, I might actually rank Strife lower because, wow, every time I see Strife, it just does not really do that good. And really thinking about it makes me realize why. Because it's really hard to keep your bonus damage unless you're intentionally bringing less people into a fight. But on the other hand, some of these bonuses are really strong. Just being able to raise instantly, just being able to generate a lot of Imperium. These are really strong. Strife, as you might imagine, Strife is way more complicated, and I did mention it's way easier to screw up. It's the most complicated of the oaths. It's not just dumb barbarian attack thing. Okay, let's go over their units. Oath was very complicated, but let's go over their units really quick here. So it goes, Oathsworn has units and then one unit for each different oath type. Their scout has retreat expert, so he never dies. If the enemy ambushes him or attacks him, he just gets to retreat from the battle, and he cannot die from retreating. So you can use aggressive scouting and you will never die. The Sworn Guard is, of course, a tier 1 spearman. He has 5 more HP than the Feudal spearman because a Feudal spearman is terrible. He also sunders defense because a Feudal spearman doesn't sunder defense and is terrible. I'm really emphasizing how bad Feudal is because Feudal is utterly abysmal, okay? The Sworn Guard is just straight up better in every way than the Feudal Spearman, other than, hey man, if the Feudal Spearman doesn't die until they become legendary rank, then they become a defender. Wonderful. It's not even slightly good. Okay. But other than that, it's just a generic tier 1 Spearman. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible. It does have a tendency to just die because enemies shoot it. It really doesn't have really many defenses. It tends to die. Now, Honor Blade is, of course, the bread and butter of this faction. Honor Blades are a tier 1 unit with high maintenance, meaning their upkeep is increased by 2. But even with that in mind, they are insanely powerful. Coming out with 12 damage, which is above average for a tier 1 unit. 3 defense, 2 resistance, which is more the defense line of a tier 2 unit. 70 HP, which is average. So this unit does as much damage as a tier 2 unit while being tier 1. No, it does have high maintenance, but its defensive stats are pretty good as well. It doesn't have a shield, but it will be a little bit tankier than other tier 1 units. And of course, it does have defensive strike. It can hit an enemy for a very high 26 damage, then ends in defensive mode after that. Defensive mode makes, of course, immune to flanking, 2 defense, 2 resist. So these Honor Blades can run across the field, hit an enemy for a single point. These are action points. So if you have 1 point left, which you always will, you can hit an enemy for a high 26 damage, enter defense mode, making it very hard to kill you. The melee strike doing 12 damage instead of the 10 makes it a very high damage unit. These, of course, are the bread and butter of Oathsworn, I would say, and are quite good. You can basically sit on these units and just support them until tier 3. Seal Bearer depends on your harmony. So if we have Seal Bearer of Harmony, it does Seal Bolts, which is just, does it actually? Yeah, it does. Okay, it changes its damage type as well. So it's always going to do about 12 damage repeating. Then the Harmony one has Resonance Seal. There's a 6 range, all 3 actions, and it seals a single target. Instead of being an AoE, it giga debuffs a single target unit. Now, if you're Harmony, you will seal and debuff an enemy with 4 blight damage. Every time that unit is attacked, it takes 4 extra damage, which can be really useful against big targets, high tier targets, heroes. This can be very useful in just generally allowing you to get kills on people. Overall, I would still say it's kind of it's okay, but I just kind of like spamming Vow Keepers. The Warbound version of this is a little bit better, in my opinion, because it has Fire Seal. Now, Seal of Fire makes an enemy unit take 12 damage at the start of their turn for 3 turns. So it does 35 damage, which is pretty good, then 12 at the start of their turn. That makes this a pretty high damage nuke that if you hit on any of their backliners, because it does have 6 range, this can just end up doing very high damage without any investment or anything like that. Now, for Strife, Vow Keepers, or say Seal Bearers from Strife can be decent. For the Righteousness Vow, their one's not that great, because all they do, they hit a single enemy, and then attacking that enemy restores 5 hit points. It can be okay, but my general opinion is that enemies tend to not live long enough for this 5 HP to really matter. And in addition to that, if you want a healer, just go Vow Keeper. So Sealed Bearers are okay, but I don't really think highly of them. I think the Strife one can be okay just for nuking backline units and just doing a crap load of damage to them. But in that, I don't think much of them. Now this, of course, brings us to the Vow Keeper. Vow Keeper doesn't change at all, no matter what you're doing. It'll always do spirit damage, and all its abilities will be the same. Aesthetically, it changes a little bit, but that's about it. Its main ability is Purging Blast, which is outrageously strong. It hits an enemy for 14 damage and removes a positive status effect. Now, that effect can't be resisted, to my knowledge, so you'll always purge 1 buff from an enemy, which is more impactful than you'd think. This can often hit really important things like stacks of bolstered resistance, bolstered defense, stuff like that. This can screw over people like Industrious. This can also just remove just really important effects. Yeah. It is Vow of Purification, which can remove all negative status effects from an ally and give it 3 status protection. That 3 status protection, of course, stacks up and is 6 status protection. So that's really impactful. Being able to cleanse any ally is really good. This allows you to remove things like mind control, domination, stun, any of that stuff. So just having this as something you can use makes the Vow Keepers really, really powerful. Then, of course, it has that AoE heal it can use once every 3 turns. I generally can keep 2 Vow Keepers in a stack, and they are extraordinarily useful. They do kind of a support unit, so a lot of the support unit buffs you'll see from the different tomes you can go over make this unit very, very relevant. The heal basically always stays relevant because it's an AoE. Purging Blast gets only more relevant throughout the game, and Vow of Purification is enormously useful in ensuring that some of your melee units go into detrimental debuffs and ensure that a single Dominate doesn't just win the game against you. It's just a very powerful unit, really. Now, these are the tier 3 units, and they're different for each oath. Now, for Oath of Harmony, you have the Peacebringer. Now, the Peacebringer is good. 80 HP and 2/2 resistance aren't amazing, but it does make them slightly tankier by 5 than other tier 3 range units, at the very least battle mages. It's about on par with other archers, though, but its biggest effect here is just a normal 14 damage on shot, but it has 2 abilities. Not Quick Stab. I mean, Quick Stab is actually useful. It's one of the only archers that can hit people in melee at least once to kind of like hit a low health dude and get him off of you, so you don't have to take an attack of opportunity. But Line Shot is a 3-line hex, so it hits a unit and then 1 unit behind it and then another unit behind that. So that can do 20 damage. It's 4 range. That can just be a long range poke, or it can just be a slight AoE. So that's it's not amazing, but it's decent. Now, if you do hit full Harmony, so if you have reached Paragon Devotion, if you are full Devotion and you've maxed it out entirely, you get the Arrow of Harmony. Now, this is the really insane ability from this unit. This is a 6 range ability. It does take all 3 actions. You can't move before using it, but it's a 6 range ability that does 40 damage, and target unit has a 120% chance of becoming pacified. Pacified means the unit cannot use melee, physical ranged, or magic abilities. This bypasses all sorts of defensive abilities, and it's just really strong. It can just make a unit totally useless. It can just screw over either an enemy ranged unit or even a tanky melee unit. If it hits a hero, it can screw over a hero. This ability is just really, really strong. And this is only a generic tier 3 unit, so you could potentially have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these on the field, all with that arrow if you became a Paragon level Devotion. So early on, it's just a generic tier 3 archer with a decent ability lineup. It's not bad. It's quite good. In fact, I would say it's pretty good, actually, for just being a generic tier 3 unit. But then if you actually get Paragon, that Arrow of Harmony can just be crazy. Warbound is the Strife. Warbound and Avenger are very similar to each other. Now, Warbound can become mounted? Did they remove that? Well, they should have been able to be mounted. Maybe they actually removed that. But this is just a shock unit, 93.3. So it's just generic tier 3 stats, not tankier than average, not squishier than average. It's got a flaming charge strike. So this is somewhat unique. Most charge abilities deal 20% more damage per hex traveled. This deals 5 more fire damage per hex traveled. Fire damage is generally better than physical damage, so I would say that this is actually slightly better than a regular charge attack. So this unit is slightly better than a regular charge unit. Its special ability is Bulldoze, where you can use this as an action. You move 4 hexes forward. All enemies in the way sustain damage, only 10 damage, but it allows you to keep 1 action, so you can run up, bulldoze forward for super long range, and then hit people with that flaming charge strike. So this unit has very high mobility and can get easily into range to hit whoever he wants, even if they're in a defensive formation, which makes him pretty unique and pretty useful. Now, of course, like the other unit, he gets an additional ability if he becomes Paragon. That ability is somewhat okay, not exactly amazing. It is a ability for a single skill point. It does 18 fire damage, hits all adjacent enemies, and you get 3 Infernal Might. Infernal Might is plus 3 damage, doubled for non-repeating. So for him, it would be plus 6 damage. It's not amazing. Unlike the other two abilities, it's firmly okay, but it's even in a world where you might not even use it because you might need the additional damage from a flaming charge strike. Now, it does give you bonus damage, so your next attack will hit extra hard, but overall, it doesn't wow me like the other ones. I would overall say this is definitely the weakest tier 3 unit, the Strife one, which is why Vow of Strife can just become so difficult to use. Now, the Avenger is nutty. This guy is outrageously strong and become a completely... If you can afford front lines full of Avengers, you can crash anything and destroy anything. They are just really powerful. Now, of course, we have the generic stat lineup here. Not tankier than average, not squishier than average, just pretty generic. Charge Strike, that's just a generic charge. It's not stronger. In fact, I would say it's weaker than the Warbound charge. Now, your second ability is where things can get a little bit more interesting. It's a 50 base damage nuke for all 3 points that ignores 50% of defense and 50% of resist. Quite deadly, this ability. Now, what you generally do is you charge in, hit enemies, and then if they haven't died, and you haven't died, then next turn you just Helm Splitter them, and then they die for sure. This will, of course, bypass shields, bypass a lot of that resistance, so it's just quite a good ability. Now, these are 2 abilities, and they're pretty decent. When does this unit become really, really good? Well, it's already pretty good by default, but it's not any better than, for example, Barbarian Berserker. I would say a Barbarian Berserker is actually probably better than this unit by default, but when does this unit become crazy? Well, it becomes crazy when you become a Paragon. When you become Paragon, you get Radiant Slash. Radiant Slash is a 25 spirit damage AoE with a 2 hex long. So it's a pretty big AoE. Now, it can be used only in front of him, so it's only going to hit maybe at most 4 units, but it can, of course, hit 4 units in a formation. All enemy units take 25 spirit damage and instantly get blinded. Blind reduces their chance to hit from physical, ranged, and magic attacks. The enemies cannot perform retaliation attacks at all. It is quite strong, this one. Especially if you have multiple Avengers running in, all using Radiant Slash. You can completely obliterate enemy entire formations in like one move. By removing all enemy retaliation attacks, you can also blind spearmen. You can have one Avenger run in, blind the enemies, and then have a second Avenger run in and start hitting them, and they don't even get to use their first strike retaliation, and you'll just shred through their line. Additionally, if it actually hits archers, archers can't even shoot for crap on the next turn. Honestly, Radiant Slash is just an incredibly strong ability, and I've used it multiple times to just absolutely mulch front lines of enemies in multiplayer games. It's just very strong ability. So Oathsworn as a whole, it's a bit hard to rank because it's new, and it's probably the most complicated. I probably spent the most time on it here, but Harmony is definitely, in my opinion, weaker. Strife is very complicated and hard to rank. Righteousness definitely is more of a late game thing, which isn't always the best. People always think late game scaling, that's good. But, working for a stronger late game, meaning that you have a weaker early game, means that you'll often have a weaker late game because you didn't snowball as hard. So I would definitely say that Oathsworn is good. I do need a little bit more time with it, but I'd certainly call them good right now. Maybe I'm being a bit too lenient, but they certainly do some good for me. Now, Barbarian's pretty... I'd call them generic, if not for one thing. They have higher food and draft income, but they get lower knowledge income, so it's harder to get to late game technology with these people. They have the unique ability Savage Strike. Whenever this unit triggers a critical hit, if you have a repeating attack, you do +4 damage. If you have a non-repeating attack, you do +8 damage. Anytime Barbarians crit, they crit even harder, which is pretty good. This allows even low-tier units to be quite deadly and allows Barbarians to do crit builds and hit people for very, very high damage. Yeah. Their very unique aspect that brings them to basically being top tier is Ritual of Alacrity. Players can activate the Ritual of Alacrity on any owned Barbarian outpost and city. When activated, friendly units on the center of the outpost or city will restore 50% hit points, restore their entire movement speed, and removes the exhausted debuff from Forced March. Now, when you do use Forced March, you get a debuff that makes you unable to heal. Ritual Alacrity removes that debuff and heals you and gives you all your movement back. This makes Barbarians extremely mobile and allows them to constantly heal, which allows them to clear the map better than most other factions. This is just very powerful Ritual of Alacrity. I can't really underestimate how powerful it is. It gives them so much mobility, so much map pressure. As for their roster is likewise pretty good. Why is their roster good? Because, I mean, let's talk about it right here. They get a generic tier 1 shield unit. Shield units are really good at tier 1. It means you don't die. Early in the game, when you are just, running around clearing terrain, you don't really want to be dying because it's bad. Because if you're losing your late game units, you have to be rebuilding them. That means they're not building up that veterancy. Merely having a tier 1 shieldman makes this faction, in my opinion, stronger. If they didn't have a tier 1 shieldman, if it was any other unit type, if they had a spearman, they would be weaker as a faction, actually by a lot. The warrior, of course, has his unique ability, Shield Bash. He runs up and on a single action tries to stun an enemy. 90% chance to stun an enemy. Then he enters defense mode. This allows the barbarians to engage into certain targets, try to stun them, and even if you don't stun them, you end up in defense mode, which gives you that 2 resist, 2 defense, immune to flanking, and all adjacent enemies, because he has a shield, get +3 defense. He also then, of course, has that shield defense. And overall, I would say the warrior is a pretty generically good unit. It allows barbarians to engage into enemies pretty safely, not at risk of just being horribly responded to. It does just make barbarians good. The Sunderer is also a potentially very good unit. It is a melee strike that's just generically a melee strike, 12 damage. It's a little bit above average, so you can see at tier 1, most units have 10 damage, they have 12. So they're a bit more of a higher damage unit, but at 55 HP, 1/1 resistances, they're not squishy, they're not tanky. They're not squishy, but they're not tanky. They're a little bit tankier than an archer, but if they do get shot or they do get hit, they will die. The unique ability is every round, once a round, they can throw a javelin. As a single action, they can do a high damage, 16 damage hit that reduces the defense of enemies. This unit is also slippery, so it doesn't trigger opportunity attacks, and this unit is also swift, meaning it ignores slowing terrain in combat. This unit can run around the battlefield really easy, can't really get locked in melee, and can continuously throw these high damage javelins at enemies. It's pretty good, I would say. It's a pretty good unit, and of course skirmisher means it gets swift and slippery by default, but there's not that many skirmishers in the game, so you might not know. Now coming up at here, tier 2, we get the War Shaman. Now he of course is just War Shaman. He has a 14 damage hit that can poison enemies, poison just being a damage over time effect. Its only unique ability here is Invigorate. Now Invigorate is an AoE heal, which are always good. It only heals 10, but it does give strength and regeneration. So if you AoE heal over a clump of allies, you can just get a lot of effects. 2 War Shamans can stack that strength and regeneration. So it is an AoE heal that only gets stronger by having more AoE heals. Overall, I'd say the War Shaman's solid. He's not the best, but he is pretty solid. Now the Fury, this is a tier 2 archer coming at 60-1-1, so it's got pretty generic defenses for a tier 2 unit. It still only has 10 damage, which isn't the best, because a tier 2 unit that only has 10 damage, but its advantage here is whenever this unit lands an attack, it gets a stack of strength in. Strength is 10% damage. So Furies shoot enemies, and they get 10, then 20, then 30, then 40, then 50% more damage. Of course, that also applies to any weapon enchantments you give them. So Furies sitting in the back, while warriors just run up and stun enemies, can add a lot of damage to a fight. If they get that second turn of shooting, they can start doing rather insane levels of damage. And of course, Strengthen does apply to their crits, to their Savage Strike bonus hits. So if this unit can get any crit, it can start churning out lots and lots and lots of damage. I would say, pretty good for a tier 2 archer, but it does have the weakness that its upfront damage is a little bit lower. Now, Barbarian Berserkers are the bread and butter of Barbarian. This is a unit that makes Barbarians the we will kill you or die trying, but actually it's more like we will kill you and die trying. Barbarian Berserkers are quite unique in that a lot of people don't understand just how good they can be. Now they got that 90-30-30, so they're just a very generically statted unit, nothing absurd, or they're just very average. They're a very average tanky unit. but they're not actually squishier, which some people don't understand. Barbarian Berserkers are not actually squishier by default. It's just Barbarian players tend to not really build defenses on their units with any tomes or anything like that. The Charge Strike is just a generic effect. It's just 24 damage and charge. Completely normal there. They have Frenzy, so every time they deal damage, they get a stack of Strengthen, so the more they deal damage, the better. Now, of course, their unique thing here is Berserker's Rage, which a lot of people don't understand. Whenever this unit reaches 33% hit points, it gains Steadfast, so it cannot die for one turn the first time it reaches 33% hit points. You can knock it down to 33% on one turn, and then abuse it, so it does have a little bit of counterplay, but when you combine Steadfast with Berserk, it's quite strong. Now remember, the more damage you deal to a unit, the more models you knock off. So if Barbarian Berserkers have 3 units in a squad, and you drop them to 33% health, then they will lose 66% of their damage, because they only have 1/3 of their people left. But the Berserk effect has a bunch of rules here. Is uncontrollable and always attacks the closest enemy target. If no enemy in range will attack its allies, it is immune to morale effects, including morale debuffs, and damage penalties from casualties are negated. It will always do full damage, even if it's at 1 HP. So when you combine the fact it can't die, and when you combine the fact it deals more damage every time it gets a hit, and when you combine the fact it ignores damage from casualties, Barbarian Berserkers are almost impossible to stop from doing something. They will always get into your backline, they will always deal damage, they will always do something. Even if you try to tank them with your front line, they're going to generally do so much damage that they'll actually really wreck your front line. The only safe way to really deal with this unit is to proc its Berserker's Rage before it gets in range, so it spends its Steadfast turn just running up and hitting a unit with a shield or something that can maybe try to tank through it. It's quite a good unit. So we've got a pretty solid roster here with no weaknesses. Now, of course, our Pathfinder, their Scout, has the outrageously powerful effect that it can set down outposts. Normally, you can only put down outposts with your hero, but the Barbarian Pathfinder can put down outposts on its own. This allows it to scout out good locations for cities, and then instead of relying on your hero coming over there, they can just set up the outposts themselves. That's really strong. That's actually insanely strong. That's actually really, really, really strong. So in combination with Ritual of Alacrity, which you can use at outposts that can be set up by your scouts, this just allows the barbarians to move everywhere and do everything. Now, Primal is complicated because Primal has a lot of different effects. Primal generically has higher food income, and generically they try to terraform their land. They have a unique quest, and you'll have to play them to really understand it, but generally each of these different animals tries to terraform their land into different things, and then gives you buffs for being on that land. Then they hit enemies, and each time they hit an enemy, they build a stack. At 5 stacks, they then get a buff based on what animal they chose. Does everybody get that? Okay. So to use Mire Crocodile as an example here, if they hit an enemy 5 times, they then get the boon of the Mire Crocodile. They disease enemies and deal an additional 3 blight damage on hit. Compare that to the Sylvan Wolf, where when you hit an enemy 5 times, you then get the Sylvan Wolf Spoon. This gives you 3 spirit damage, and then 2 additional spirit damage per each friendly unit adjacent to the enemy. So Sylvan Wolf is really good at hitting enemies and just mobbing them with lots of people and just zerging them, whereas Mire Crocodile is more good at reducing their resistances through disease. Now, of course, let's go through each of these, because each of these will be a little bit better or worse depending on their terrain. Mire Crocodile likes being in swamp and gives food. Food is generally considered the least useful resource, and diseasing enemies is not really considered that good either, and getting immunity to disease is not really considered that good either. Swamp is also pretty rare on the map, so getting Swamp Rock is really not that relevant. Mire Crocodile doesn't really do much. Now, Stormcrow is much better. It gives you grass. Old grass gives you mana. There's a lot of grass on the map by default. Even before you terraform anything, you're gonna generally have access to grass. It's really good. Additionally, you get the Stormcrow's Boon, which deals 3 lightning damage after you proc it up, and then deals 4 lightning damage to each adjacent enemy, giving you an early game AoE. It doesn't skill that great, but early in the game, especially if you have lots of people, you can just sort of whack enemies and start stacking up a good chunk of AoE damage. Units also get grassland walk, so you move through grassland at 4 movement points instead of 6. There's a lot of grass on the map, and you move faster on grassland. That's really, really strong, Stormcrow. Okay. Glacial Mammoth, of course, also has some advantages as well. You can build farms on all snow terrain. Most other factions can't. You start in the Arctic, which means you'll generally start either at the top of the map. You'll generally start at the edge of the map, which can be very good because it means that it's kind of hard to get locked out of being able to play the game. Sometimes it can screw you over, but generally just always knowing that you're going to be at the edge of the map can be favorable sometimes. You can kind of get a feel for how the map layout is going to be and get a good idea. Now, all snow provinces give you 3 production. Production just for free, for existing. This can allow you to set up your cities way quicker than other people. And can just, I mean, it's just free. It's just free production that just stacks up really quickly and can really help you building all your different buildings. You get Arctic Walk. Now, Arctic Walk, for some reason that I'll never understand, Stormcrow gets to move through grasslands at 4 movement points, but you only get to walk through snow at 5 movement points. I don't know why it's easier to move through grassland than snow. Snow is clearly more rare than grassland, but whatever. And then your boon, of course, is you get 4 frost damage with a 30% chance on every attack to inflict frozen. That can be a bit low on the RNG, but when it does proc, it can be really irritating because frozen is stun. You have a 30% chance to stun after you get the boon. As you might imagine, that can just win battles. Ash Sabertooth is miserable. Let me explain why Ash Sabertooth is so miserable. You start on Ashlands. Now think about that. If you start on Ashlands, how many trees do you think there are around you? Often none. Often very little. Getting an early tree as your first expansion for your population allows you to boost the library. Boosting the library sets you up with more knowledge. It also allows you to boost a lot of things. Forest trees are just generally pretty useful. And Ash Sabertooth basically guarantees that even if you do get some forest trees, they're going to be pretty rare around you. Now, it does give you 3 gold, which is its only saving grace, but it's just not really that amazing. You can move on Ashlands for 5 movement points, and you can move through chasms for 8 movement points instead of 12. So it is okay, once again, like it gives you some decent stuff, but it's really not that amazing. Ash Sabertooth Boon is not too bad. You get 3 fire damage, and then it deals 4 fire damage to a single enemy up to 2 hexes away. So it's kind of like Stormcrow, but it instead of hitting all adjacent enemies, it hits 1 enemy, but the enemy can be further away. So the boon isn't the problem. The problem is it just kind of eliminates. It is a high chance of RNGing you out of the game, and it is a high chance of just not really letting you get the buildings you need, or I should say the expansions you need. Ash Sabertooth kind of ints you pretty frequently. It's a bit frustrating. Now, Dune Serpent, you might not believe this. I don't really want to go through it again. It's pretty much the same thing. It just eliminates your ability to get woods nearby because you start on sand. Sand doesn't have a high chance of starting on woods. Now, as compared to Ash Sabertooth, you get only 2 gold, presumably because they thought sand would be better. Sand Walk is 5 movement points instead of 6. Stormcrow continues to have the winner. Your advantage here is you get 4 physical damage and blind enemies. This is pretty useless, I'm going to be real with you. Blind doesn't affect that much as you might imagine. Physical damage is much weaker than elemental damage, and that's it. This is one of the weaker boons. Is it the worst? I don't know, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones. And in addition to potentially inting your start and just not being that strong, Dune Serpent's probably the weakest of Primal. If not for Tunneling Spider. Now, Tunneling Spider always forces you to start underground. A lot of people don't actually read. You need to learn to read. You start in the underground. It's terrible to start in the underground. You don't want to start in the underground. It's really bad to start in the underground. Now, you can build farm underground, which can be okay, but it's not good. Mushroom Forest provinces are favorite terrain and gain 2 knowledge. Now, knowledge is the best resource, so you might think that it saves you, but no, starting underground is just such a self-int that Tunneling Spider is just miserable. Trying to play it is miserable, I promise you. Now units do get cave walks. You can move through caves easier, which is fine, I guess. Tunneling Spider's boon is one of the better boons in the game. You get 3 blight damage and lifesteal. Lifesteal means you heal 10 for a single hit or 3 for multi-hit abilities. So the boon isn't bad. It's not really that bad, but it's just starting underground. It's just generally terrible. It's just awful. Sylvan Wolf is actually fairly relevant and can be pretty good. Now, getting draft is okay. It's not the best, but the thing with Sylvan Wolf is as you start in a forest, there is a lot of synergy in tomes for being in a forest. A lot. So when you get all those forest tomes that buff you just for being in a forest, and you can terraform forests for free, this is really strong for the synergy with the nature tomes and the nature tree line. Draft isn't that big a deal, but it's fine. In addition, spirit damage is the best damage, and plus spirit damage for each friendly unit adjacent to the target can stack up and be a lot of damage in the early game. Additionally, I haven't really mentioned that each of these different animals summons differently, but I'm gonna mention with the Primal Wolf. The Sylvan Wolf does the most damage, and you can just summon it. It's a spell. You can summon your Sylvan Wolf. You summon it right behind an enemy. You get flanking damage. You just hit them, bam, bam, bam. This is really strong because this allows you can summon it directly behind the enemy's hero if they're trying to play some sort of range character, and you can just flank them, and first turn you summon it, you'll generally hit them at about half. They'll probably respond on their turn and desperately kill the wolf. Then you just summon it again and do the other half and kill their hero. It's really strong and in fact can be quite frustrating. It can be really frustrating to try to fight. So for example, if I look at the Primal Spider does more damage, and might be better, but it's just the Sylvan Wolf already comes on a faction that's good. And then, yeah, it does +2 spirit damage for a friendly unit adjacent to the target. It can just be really strong. It can just be really, really, really strong, the Sylvan Wolf summon. And it comes on an animal that's already good. So, yeah. Now, Reaver, in my opinion, it takes too much time to get going. It has too many drawbacks. It's too specific. It needs you to do too many very specific things. I don't think much of Reaver, but a lot of the things that they do are pretty cool. So it's a bit frustrating that Reaver's not better, but I just don't think it's really that good. Now, what does Reaver do? Some things that I'll have to go into. Their units are very unique, and their playstyle is a bit unique. Okay. A society of industrial opportunists, pragmatic and brutal, they combine the material and the arcane, expanding their dominion through conquests and hunts. So they have higher production and mana income. These are both fine, they're good things. Units are specialized in focusing down marked targets. So the unique effect of Reaver is focused aggression. Every single unit from Reaver deals more damage per mark on the target. Mark stacks up to 5 times, and you can deal up to 50% more damage. Melee attacks from his faction have additional chances to apply marked. Otherwise, you have to get it from an ability. That's 60% chance, 90% chance of a single target hit. Mark by default reduces enemies' evasion. So Mark will make you deal more damage. Melee units will hit enemies, then deal even more damage to those enemies that they're hitting. And if they hit enemies, it can reduce the evasion, so you can just shoot them with a gun and blow them away. They do not start with the Whispering Stone, so they're not good at diplomacy at all. They never take an Imperium penalty from declaring war, and they get war spoils. War spoils are a unique resource gathered by the Reavers through conquest and battles with empires and free cities. They can be used to intimidate and extort free cities and other empires. Now, sorry, no stuffy. Now you can use war spoils for some different things. They're not really that strong. They can try to extort other empires. They can try to extort free cities and get free resources from them. They're okay. They're not exactly blowing my mind, though. I'm not really going to talk about it because it's one of those things where it's like I would have to explain a lot. What I want to spend most of my time here is talking on the Reaver units. The Reaver units are very unique and very cool, and that's why a lot of people want to try them. Up here, first up, we have the Mercenary. Much like the unit from Oathsworn, or whatever they're called. Is it Oathsworn? Oathsworn, yeah, Oathsworn. Much like Oathsworn, we have a high maintenance melee unit. Now, it does, much like Oathsworn, have higher base damage It is more stat like a tier 2 unit with 75 HP, 3 defense, and 2 resistance. 12 damage baseline. And of course, they have that 60% chance of inflicting mark from being a Reaver. Their unique ability is Drive Back. This deals damage to the target, pushing them back and moving onto their hex. So you move up to an enemy, knock them back, and move forward. It can knock enemies off your ranged units, allowing your ranged units to blow them away, or it can just push enemies back to generate a little bit of space. It pierces 50% of the target's defense, so even if an enemy is tanky, you'll get a little bit of damage on them. It's got a 2-turn cooldown, so you can only use it every 3 turns, but it's pretty good for building space or knocking people off your range unit. So this unit is a pretty decently tanky tier 1 unit. Now, the problem here you are probably noticing is that this is the only pure melee unit of Reavers, and it's not that tanky. It's somewhat tanky, but it's not that tanky. The problem with Reavers is that the mercenaries have a high tendency to just get shot at and killed because they don't have a shield, and often their ranged units are relying on the enemies running into them. So a mercenary can be a bit complicated to use. The Harrier is their other tier 1 unit. This is just a generic skirmisher. Got all that generic skirmisher stats, 55-1-1. They do above average melee damage like other skirmishers often do, and their unique ability is Cast a Net. There's a high damage ability. It's only usable once every other turn, not every turn, but has a very high chance of immobilizing enemies at a 90% chance. Once you immobilize an enemy, the general idea is you move in your range units and you blow them away next turn. Overall, it's not that great. It can be okay, but it's not that great. That's all I really have to say. They're okay, but they're not that great. So the problem with Reavers is they're coming up with a tier 1 lineup that's not really that good and doesn't really have any synergy. The mercenaries don't work with the Harriers because the Harriers are already slippery and swift, so they can already walk right out of melee anyway. So mercenaries only really start coming online once you have ranged units that they can support, which isn't the best for a faction to only come online at tier 2. Most other factions can do a lot at tier 1. But once you do get tier 2, you do get unique Overseer. The Overseer is a unique unit. They do very little damage, but they do have a chance to blind. So using them to deal damage is generally bad, but they can blind people. Blind is an okay debuff. It can turn enemy range units off. It only has a 60% chance though, so it's not that high of a chance to do it. Its unique ability is Subdue. It's a 3 range ability with only 1 action, so you can use it. It's a 90% chance to link with an enemy and inflict Subdue. The target already needs to be immobilized, frozen, or stunned. You cannot use it on heroes or any unit with control loss immunity. And it ends if the caster dies. So what is Subdue? Subdue. This unit is subdued by an enemy. It cannot use actions or movements. It's basically permanently stunned. This unit is captured if the caster is victorious. Captured, meaning captured units may be recruited after combat by spending war spoils or gold for non-Reaver empires. So Reavers can spend war spoils. So you can capture an enemy unit and then directly recruit it in your army. It's okay, and it can build you some extra units in the early game to kind of get more units to start waging more war against enemies. It's okay, but it's not really blowing my mind. Oftentimes, enemy units that you fight aren't really the best synergy with your empire. There are situations where it can be quite good for sure, but overall, we're really not looking at that great of a lineup so far. Now, it does have a unique heal. All it does is heal, and it's only at 1 range, but it heals for 40, which is quite a lot. The 40 healing is a lot. Now, it can only be used every 3 turns, and it does nothing other than heal, but it does heal for a lot. It's only a single target, though. That's all this unit does. So far as the support unit from factions go, this one's not the best. I would not rank this one as the highest tier of support units. It's firmly, the single target heal for 40 is quite good. So where does the Reaver lineup start getting interesting? Now it does, with the Mage Lock. The Mage Lock is a unit with a weirdly nice ass that is very, 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 very high damaging. They've got 2 abilities that work together. Fire Heavy Mage Lock. Now this only has a 60% chance to hit and can only shoot once. but it deals 34 base damage, ignores 50% of defense, ignores 50% of resist. So if you enchant these units to have bonus magical damage, they can already have synergy with that. And of course, as always, they deal 10% bonus damage per mark on the enemy. So the Mage Hawk does a lot of damage, but only has a 60% chance to hit. That doesn't seem great. But it has a second ability, Take Aim. This leaves you with 1 action left. So you use all 3 actions and only have 1 action left, and gives you a plus 80% accuracy. This would give you a total of 140% accuracy. That's better accuracy than other range units, which generally either have 100% or 90% accuracy. So if you can use all 3 actions and shoot at 5 range, you can deal massive damage that will basically be a guaranteed hit and ignore resistance, and you'll be able to shoot even shield units from the front and shred them. So if you can actually defend your mage locks and you can get them into position, you can shoot with them, they deal massive damage. Now, the unit that really helps solidify this roster, and it's kind of weird that you only really start solidifying your roster at tier 3, which is one of the weaknesses of Reavers, but let's say you got to tier 3. You get a somewhat squishy, somewhat not squishy unit. It's 80 HP, 2-2, so it's not exactly tanky, but it's not exactly squishy, tier 3 unit. In melee, they just have a repeating 16 damage hit, so it's a bit higher damage here, like old skirmishers. But its main defining feature here is a harrying shot. Now, the harrying shot has a unique property where you can shoot and then move afterwards. It doesn't actually end your turn. Now, it's only 3 range, but it does have a lot of things. It is piercing, breaching, so it ignores 50% of effects. You can distract enemies. Now, this is where this starts getting interesting. You shoot the harrying shot at an enemy, which of course can distract them. Now they take 25% more damage because they can be flanked from the front. Then you walk away, and then if the enemy walks forward, or if the enemy is already in range of your allies, if it's already in range of your allies, you 25% more damage, technically flanking damage, and you utterly obliterate it with a mage lock. If it's not in range of your allies, you just back away, and then they have to run after you because you keep running in, shooting them, and then backing away. This is pretty unique in that regard. That's from their, After attacking, this unit regains half their action points, but can no longer attack. So this unit can whack enemies in melee and back away, or reposition, or can shoot them and reposition. It's a very, very powerful unit for repositioning, harassing enemies, and making them want to walk into your Mage Lock cannons. Sorry, I keep getting... so what is a Mage Lock cannon? This is a decently tanky unit for a range unit. 80 HP, 4 defense, 2 resist. For a range unit, that's pretty tanky against physical damage. Its unique ability is Fire Cannon. This uses every action, so it cannot move while shooting, and it must stay still, but it's 5 range. Now, enemies in a 3-line hex, so it AoEs 3 enemies, ... It hits up to, it can hit up to 3 enemies, but it often won't. But it's a massive damage hit. The Mage Hawk does more damage at 34, but this does 30 damage, potentially AoE. And it has very unique properties that help your faction a lot. All enemies are yoinked out of defensive mode. They cannot retaliate against you, and this ability is a typical ignores 50% defense, 50% resist. So this unit can shred enemy defensive lines, knock them out of their defensive stance, and allow you to just beat the crap out of them with all your other units. It cannot be berserked, it cannot be dominated. It's heartless, so it gets negative 50% morale reduction. It's reinforced, so if enemies try to shoot it with their own range units, it gets a lot of armor against that. And it gets Siege Breaker, so when you're sieging an enemy, if you're sieging an enemy city with this unit, it helps and will help you siege much quicker. So the Mage Hawk Cannon allows the Reavers to siege down cities very quickly. It allows you to break enemies in defensive formations. What is its weakness? It cannot move and shoot. So unless you're using units that can pull enemies or reposition them in some way, every enemy has to end their turn knowing that they're going to be shot by the Mage Hawk Cannon. So the weakness of the Mage Hawk Cannon here is enemies are in full control of playing around it. Now, your job as a Reaver player is to use your Dragoons to use your mage locks, to use the rest of your roster, to be so annoying that enemies will generally misplay and walk into your cannons and get utterly obliterated. Do you want a lot of mage lock cannons? No, maybe one, maybe two per army, that's about it. But even then, they'll be strong enough that even with only one or two, you can use them to just completely win a battle anyway. That's the hope anyway. In total, the Reaver roster is interesting. It's certainly the sort of roster that a lot of people want to play. The only problem with the Reaver roster is it really doesn't synergize well until tier 2, and then really doesn't synergize that well until tier 3 once you get Dragoons. And then it's a very expensive roster that is spamming out a lot of tier 3 units. Yeah, additionally, it has a problem where it doesn't really have any good frontliners, so you need to find frontliners from tomes, which can be a bit restrictive, really. Overall, despite having a really cool playstyle and having a really unique roster, a lot of people just have not rated the Reavers very highly. Now, Industrious, I can go over Industrious way quicker. We won't be spending 90 minutes here. Industrious gets good production. They get good production, so they can churn through all their buildings really quickly. Additionally, every unit that takes damage gets 1 stack of bonus defense by default. If they take resistance, they get bonus resistance. Sorry, if they take magic damage, they get bonus resistance. If they take physical damage, they get bonus defense. It's just generally how they work. Their units get tankier the more they get hit. It's not the most amazing racial benefit, but their racial units will show you how good it can be. Their unique effect is scout prospecting. Their scout units can prospect, generally along cliffs, mountains, or stalagmite, and while prospecting, your scout units can generate production, gold, or items. How much? A lot, actually. Quite a lot. To the point where having 2 or 3 scouts chain prospecting can get you the most powerful cities in the game easily. Like, you can end up with cities producing way more than anyone else very quickly by just prospecting a lot. It's extraordinarily powerful. Industrious gets the most powerful cities just for sitting a scout on a mountain and just prospecting a lot. It's just, I don't know a different way to put it. It's just really strong. It's not the most complicated faction. It's just a very, it can be very powerful. It can be a bit slow, but it can also be very powerful. Now, of course, the Industrious lineup is actually pretty good. Now, their regular scout has a crossbow. They can shoot for 12 damage. It's not that amazing. Their main thing is they can walk on mountains way easier than other scouts, which then, of course, allows them to prospect. But it also gives them sort of an advantage in scouting, in that their scouts can actually walk over mountains at a reasonable pace, while no one else really can. Their generic tier 1 lineup is pretty good. They've got the Anvil Guard at tier 1, a generic 75-0 unit. It's just a generic tier 1 shield unit. Of course, it gets shield defense, but it gets 2 unique effects that are quite powerful. The first is Watchful. It is +1 retaliation. So in a straight fight with other shield units, it will always win, because you'll attack an enemy, they'll get 1 retaliation. So you hit 3 times, they hit once. They attack you, they hit 3 times, you hit twice. So you'll always get 1 more attack if you're just sitting there beating the crap out of each other. So in long fights, the Anvil Guard will generally come out ahead. Their second ability, their second effect is Taunt. They can taunt an enemy with a 90% chance. This will make an enemy run in and just immediately hit you. Taunt is, as an effect, I would say Taunt is the most broken CC in the game, because at the start of the enemy's turn, that unit will immediately try their best to sprint into you and deal damage to you. That includes even if they need to walk through an ally's zone of control, thereby ending their turn, thereby taking attacks of opportunity. Even if the unit can't reach you, it will run forward, even if that means running into an ally. It's quite abusable, and it's on their tier 1 unit. Additionally, even if an enemy is trying to hold a position and tank, you can just taunt them, and because it's a tier 1 unit, you're probably gonna have 3, 4, 5, 6 taunts in your army. Well, maybe not 1 army, but when you have 3 armies combined, and you'll always be able to land probably at least 1 or 2 and make an enemy charge forward towards your line. Then you just defend and you shoot them. What do you shoot them with? Your Arbalists. Now this is just another generic 50-0-0 for a tier 1 unit. They're squishy. They do have bolstering though, which helps them be a little bit tankier. And then what are their abilities? They can shoot a crossbow for 20 damage at 1 action, so they can reposition and shoot way better than any other archer for pretty good damage. But if they are holding still and not moving, then they get overdraw crossbow, which does 30 damage, and cancels the enemy defense mode and removes their retaliation. So what this unit can do is it can sit behind an anvil guard, and if the anvil guard is fighting another shield unit, it can overdraw the crossbow, deal a lot of damage to that shield unit, remove its defensive mode, remove its retaliation, and then your anvil guard can just smack the crap out of them with no retaliation. So their tier 1 lineup is quite good. Both these units are quite solid and have no issue. Their tier 2 lineup is likewise also pretty solid, actually. Now, their halberdier is a mere 12 damage, so he's not a particularly high damage fellow, but what he does have is his effects here. Watchful gives him, you'll never believe this, another +1 retaliation attack. So he's just really good at first striking and then hitting an enemy twice who hits him. His second effect is Rune of Retaliation. Any damage he takes from melee, he reflects 40% of that back onto an enemy, which that's pretty good. So, yeah, this is like one of the ultimate anti-melee polearms in the game. It can just obliterate you to try to fight them in melee. Most times, I know I joked about it with the high, but there's practically no way to try to hit a halberdier and not take more damage than you dealt to them. It's almost impossible to do it. This unit is so good at just being a dick. Now, how does this faction work? Won't they get whittled away, maybe picked off by range? I don't know, something like that. Well, their Steel Shaper is a, never believe this, pretty good dude. Now, it's got 16 damage on its attack, but 16 physical, so it can be a bit weaker. Its effects here are it can free action grant 2 bolstered defense to an ally. That's 2 defense. Now, bolstered defense stacks up to 5. So you can very quickly get an ally to 5 extra defense, making them outrageously tanky. What happens if they get to 5 and they're too low? Then you use Strength from Steel. For every bolstered defense, that becomes a strengthened. So they lose all their bolstered defense, but they heal 8 for each lost and then get strengthened by 1. So if you have 5 bolstered defense and you can add 2 from a free action, you heal for 8. So if you lose all 5, you heal for 40. That's a 40 single target heal. And then you would get 5 strengthened for 50% more damage. This can completely turn a fight and is just really strong, actually. The synergy here is pretty good. Now, at tier 3, this is one of the better units in the game, is the Bastion. Now, this dude is 100 HP, which is slightly above average for a tier 3 unit, and it can ride a mount. If your faction is a mount, which is really relevant for the Bastion. It is a low 12 damage, so it doesn't do the most damage. It's not really here for the damage, though, as you might imagine, and its unique ability is Defense Sweep. You deal damage to an enemy, then 50% of that damage to all adjacent enemies, and then you enter defense mode. It obviously has a shield, so it has the shield wall. So it can deal damage to an enemy, and then end its turn in defense mode, and it can AoE enemies, and then just generally be really hard to hit. It can, Defensive Sweep has a cooldown of 2, so it can do this every 3 turns. This allows it to engage into enemies while dealing damage and ending in defense mode, or it allows it on the line to just deal a little bit of damage and enter into defense mode so that it can't be hit as hard back on its turn. Of course, it is Watchful for that +1 retaliation attack. Again, bolstered defense, shield defense. The Bastion is just an outrageously tanky dude who's just really, really tanky. They also have the free action Inspiring Defense, which is a free action, so it doesn't end your turn and can be used for free. Every 3 turns, this unit and an adjacent friendly unit both get bolstered defense. So Bastions, Steel Shapers, and Halberdiers can form an outrageously good melee line. This means that all Industrious needs to do is get some sort of ranged attack, and their Bastions will be the tankiest unit in the game at tier 3, and then their ranged attackers will have some of the tankiest dudes in front of them just generally being unkillable. The Steel Shapers can also keep people alive because Strength from Steel only has a 1-turn cooldown. Most heals can only be used every 3 turns, but Strength from Steel can be used every 2 turns. Really strong unit, as I mentioned. Then, of course, the synergy between turning your bolster defense into healing, when the Bastions can give themselves and an ally more defense, the Steel Shaper can give an ally more defense. It's very frequent that you'll always almost have 5 stacks of defense on someone to turn into healing. So it's just a very powerful roster. The only problem with Industrious is they need to build scouts, they need to start prospecting, and it takes a little bit of time to get them going. They don't have any direct boosts to their early game, but they get very powerful cities very quickly and can very quickly kind of just get out of control for the enemies. Now, they do have one weakness in that magic AoE spamming their bastions is generally the way to get around them. Now, Dark is not very strong. I don't think... Dark does have some strengths, but I'll go into exactly why their weaknesses can be a bit overbearing. Now, they have cities can ignore penalties from low city stability. That's not as good as you think it is, and it's far more restrictive than you think it is. It's not nearly as good. I'm not going to go into it, but that's not that great. You have high knowledge income and gain extra income from prisons and crypts. So Dark wants to get enemy heroes into their prisons or into their crypts, which can be good. They also get more knowledge, which is the best resource in the game. And they get faction-wide. Their unique effect is Call the Weak. Range and, well, base physical, ranged, and magic attacks have a base 90% chance of inflicting weakened. So all your range units can weaken enemies. Weakened reduces the damage enemies deal by 10%. Then, if you are a melee unit and hitting a weakened enemy, you deal 20% more damage, and you heal for 10 hit points once per turn. The general idea here is you shoot them, reduce their damage, your melee runs in, deals a lot of damage, and then heals for it. So, this is strong, right? You can imagine how this is strong. So how could this end up being weak? With a powerful faction effect here, and with getting the best resource in the game, how could this end up being weak? Because that's all they do as a faction, the things I just mentioned. And although those things they do seem like they could be really strong, the issue is that their roster is so bad in the early game, they can suffer really, 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 really hard. Their scout has only the unique effect get +2 vision when in enemy domain. That's not nearly as good as you think it is. It does have swamp camouflage, mountain camouflage, forest camouflage, so it could potentially sit in an enemy's city and just scout it out for you, hypothetically. That could work. I'm not saying it wouldn't work, it could work. It's not the worst thing ever, but compared to other scouts, it's not exactly the greatest. Here's exactly why this faction sucks. It's all this unit's fault. This unit right here, it's all his fault, the Dark Warrior. With 60 HP, 1 defense, and 1 resistance, the Dark Warrior has a massive habit of dying. Constantly, all the time. Dying in 1 turn from full HP. Even though they have Call the Weak, even though hypothetically they heal 10 health per turn, even though hypothetically they can keep their health bar topped off, even though hypothetically enemies are weakened and they don't die, they just die all the time. Now, the balance here was likely because if enemies deal reduced damage and these units heal each turn, that would lead to quite a frustrating, overpowered unit. But by making them so squishy, almost as squishy as a skirmisher, this unit just dies all the time, which means you need to buy new ones and you need to replace them. You can't use a different unit because this is your only unit for tier 1. This means Dark has a serious issue where their starting army often gets mulched and takes way too much damage, and they can struggle to expand as easy as other factions. It's really not great. So we have a faction whose a lot of their benefits are killing heroes and getting them in their prisons, getting them in their crypts, that can't really expand as well as other factions. We have a faction whose main benefit is adding weakness to enemies and lifestealing on it, on a unit that, even if it's at full HP, can very easily die in 1 turn from like 2 units hitting it. Sometimes even 1 unit hitting it. The Pursuer is just a generic range unit. It can ride a mount, which can be cool, but it's just 50, 0, 0, 10 damage. It just has a chance to weaken enemies. Overall, not that amazing, not bad. For a tier 1 lineup, this is quite bad. If you compare this to, for example, the Industrious lineup of Giga Tanky frontline, massive damage range unit behind it, the Dark lineup is not nearly as foreboding. There's almost no world where Dark Warriors and Pursuers can possibly beat the Industrious lineup. Now, their tier 2 starts getting way better. The Night Guard have some unique effects, but they're not exactly the greatest. I think of all the Spearmen, they're probably the weakest of the tier 2 Spearmen, which, you know, we can get into right here. They got first strike, which is decent, but no second retaliation. So they hit you first, but that's it. Now they can apply the 10 healing, so you can heal in your turn, then their turn, then your turn. So it can, the Night Guard, hypothetically, be a really frustrating unit to 1v1, but, you know, once you get good at the game, you're not really going to just give him a 1v1. You're just going to walk up and one-shot him. He does average damage in here at 14 for a Spearman. I mean, it's good. It's above average for, like, Swordsman or anything like that. Like, 14 is good for tier 2. Its unique ability here is Dark Stalwart. On the end of this unit's turn, enemy units have a 90% chance of receiving sundered defense and sundered resistance. The problem here is we take a unit that's not particularly tanky. They're just average tanky for Spearmen, and they need to run up to enemies. Let me turn that off for a second. You need to run up to enemies, and then you debuff them at the end of your turn. Not the start of your turn, not after you deal damage. So you run up to enemies, then you make them squishier, then they get to take your turn, then you start your turn, and then they're down 1 resist and 1 defense 90% of the time. That's not so incredible, and it's definitely not as good as the other Spearmen. Like, 40% of all melee damage you take is reflected, and you get 2 retaliations. That's incredible. You can sometimes debuff them, not as good. In fact, I'm gonna have to change my opinion. Their tier 2 lineup for Dark might not even start being good, because compared to all the other Spearman units, this one is not good. The Warlock can be okay. Like, I'll give it that. They got Sundering Curse. Now, this is a 6-range nuke, single target, but it does hit an enemy with weakened at 100% chance, unless they have status resist, that's 100% chance. They get 2 sundered defense and 2 sundered resistance. So it's pretty good at nuking enemies from a decently long range. Pretty decent damage at 24. Overall, still weaker than other casters. I'd rather have it be an AoE. I'd rather my caster be doing an AoE than just a single target debuff. The debuff is decently good, but not that amazing. It's only as tanky as a tier 1 skirmisher, so they tend to get offed pretty quickly. Their attack is below average damage, and isn't really that amazing either. So overall, I would say the Warlock is also weak. So this unit's weak, this unit's weak, this unit is okay, and this unit is weak. The roster is not doing anything good for me right now. So this brings us to the Dark Knight. Now the Dark Knight is good. I definitely think the Dark Knight is good, and it's basically the entirety of the reason you play Dark. So why am I not being wowed by it? Because power creep has kind of happened, and not only does Spearman get used all the time, not only are other units way better than they used to be, but just generally the way the game plays out, the Dark Knight isn't always the best. Now, I do think it's still a good unit. I think it's still like in the upper echelons of unit. Being able to run in, charge an enemy, and then if he doesn't die, he gets a Dark Surge. Dark Surge being a 36 damage nuke. If an enemy has any debuff at all, which they almost always will, that's quite strong. This unit can be quite strong, for sure. Also, if they are weakened, he gets to deal plus 20% damage and heal 10, which can matter a lot. It can be a bit harder to deal with this unit, but overall, the Dark roster is just bad, and particularly, it's bad early game. Okay. Let's talk about Mystic then. Mystic is probably overall the strongest culture, in my opinion. Sorry, my nose is just itching. I think I got a cat hair in it. Overall, Mystic is probably the strongest. By default, it gets higher mana income, and then has 3 different subcultures. So by default, all it has is higher mana income, but each of these different subcultures are very different. Attunement is what Mystic used to be by default before they split it into 3 schools. So Attunement gives every single one of your units Star Blades. Whenever you cast a spell, depending on the affinity of the spell, Every unit on the board does +1 damage, stacking up to 3 times, doubled for non-repeating attacks. For a board-wide buff, this is quite big and can help your units a lot. It's just really strong, really no downside. You cast a spell, you deal more damage, and then you cast another spell, you deal more damage again, then you cast a third spell and you deal even more damage. And this applies to everybody across the board. Pretty good. If that was all they had, it wouldn't really be that good. They get Astral Echoes, which then allows them to use Echo Casting. I don't really want to explain it that much. Echo Casting allows them to cast spells more often. So overall, Mystic Attunement, pretty good. Mystic Potential is very complicated, and I'm going to be real with you. Mystic Potential is probably... It's one of those things that's so complicated, it's probably too hard to use. And even though it is really hard to use, it's also really not that good if you use it well. It's still good. It's still better than most other cultures, but it's just really hard to use and really easy to screw up. Okay, so combat spells are always overcharged for the first time they're cast each combat. So every time you cast a spell for the first time, it's considered overcharged. What is overcharged? It is a various amounts of effects. Damage spells do more damage, healing spells do more healing, buff and debuff spells do more buffs and debuffs. I'm not going to go into it more than that. So every turn, the first time you cast a combat spell, in each individual one, so you can't cast the same one twice to get it to be overcharged. You have to be flipping through your different spells each turn. You only get to cast it once per combat for it to be overcharged, okay? So then you can use spells to exploit arcane inspiration and gain an economic edge. I'm not going to explain that. Basically, the big thing of this culture is every time any one of these units from this culture hits an enemy, it puts a dissonance stack on them. Dissonance stacks up to 5 times. So you can do up to 5 dissonances on an enemy. Then when you overcharge a spell, they take the dissonance stacks times 4 damage, up to 20 damage. Why does this sound complicated? Because often people will kill enemies, meaning that the dissonance stacks were useless, or they'll just misuse their overcharge spells and forget that they were to use that one, and oops, that one wasn't overcharged. Or they'll just generally overkill an enemy with dissonance. They'll have like 4 dissonance stacks on them, but they only have 4 HP. So they take 16 damage for 4 HP and they die, like big whoop. It's hard to use dissonance. You need to have a lot of awareness of what's going on, and you need to really calculate your damage really hard. I'm not saying this is bad. The overcharge effect is already pretty good. Dissonance is kind of free money here, but it can just be very hard to use. It's certainly better than most cultures, as I said, but it's just very hard to use and is not nearly as good. Now, Mystic Summoning, I would say, is straight up the most broken culture in the game right now. I'm really not sure why it's so broken. Okay, so all Magic Origin units get Attunement Astral Resonance. Whenever you cast a spell, any spell, every friendly Magic Origin unit, that's anything units you summon on the board, anything units you summon on the board, and you'll often have 5 of them in your armies because they're going to get so buffed it's going to go crazy. Every unit heals 10 and gets a stack of Strengthened. So often you'll have 3 heroes with 15 magic units between them, so every single unit on your board will get strengthened and heal for 10. Then you collect these Astral Echoes, and then you can use those Astral Echoes to rank up your units. As you might notice as you play this game, if you can rank up units for free, you can make them really, really, really strong. You can also force some units to evolve into tier 3 variants of them. This is really, really strong. This is outrageously strong. You can even do things like force evolve a skeleton warrior from level 1 2 or 3 times, get them ranks, and that skeleton warrior will end up beating down actual units because they're a higher rank. It's pretty strong. Then all magic, because we're not done yet, then all Magic Origin units get, sorry, I moved my mouse there, they get 5 morale for each friendly unit with this property. As you might imagine, this means magic units always enter the battle with maximum morale, so they always have 20% crit chance. That's just like a default bonus. They just always get 20% more crit from being at maximum morale. So you can rank up your Magic Origin units for free, which makes them very powerful. They always have maximum morale for 20% more crit, and every time you cast a spell, they all heal. They all heal, and they always get more strengthened. But for some reason, there's an unlisted bonus right here that isn't even in here. All your heroes then also get a unique attribute where any magic unit in a hero army does 10% more damage, has 10% more, 10% more damage, 10 more flat HP, and minus 10% upkeep. As you might imagine. Throughout all these different effects. Do bonus damage from strengthened, bonus damage from that hero effect, bonus damage because they're a higher veterancy. I don't think veterancy gives higher damage. But let's say bonus tankiness, bonus healing from Astral Resonance. This just goes crazy. Mystic Summoning is, I would say, all but unbeatable unless you're using a borderline exploit strategy. Mystic Summoning, I'm not saying they're literally unbeatable, but you would need to have a really good start and a really good race to beat them. Mystic Summoning is just really, really, really over the top, and they should really tone it down. So that's all the cultures. Let's look at Mystic's unit. Mystic tends to use their units the least. They tend to just mostly focus on using magical summons. But let's say you do want to play Mystic and you do want to use their units. Their base scout unit could be a caster. In battle, it's unique. It's not really that different, but okay. I don't think it's got anything interesting. It just has pass through. Okay. They have Arcanist. Now this is a squishier tier 1 unit, coming in with only 45 HP instead of the regular 50, and it has the Cosmic Bolts. Okay, so instead of regular archers that deal 10 physical damage, this one deals 9 elemental damage. It's not bad, but it's not good. The different attunements can affect it. So for example, if you get attunement Starblades, if you go with Mystic Attunement, this unit can start punching out a lot of damage really quickly. Other than that, it's just a generically, it does more damage than other archers because it ignores defense and just does straight magic damage, but it's a little bit squishier. Give and take, it's decent. Arcane Guard is a 65 HP, 1 defense, 2 resist. So it's an extraordinarily squishy unit that spends most of its life dead. Its unique effect is it has a 90% chance of sundering the resist of enemies. Not sundering their defense, sundering their resist. So Arcane Guards hit enemies and reduce their magic resist so the rest of your army can hit them better. They have First Strike. First Strike is part of Polearm though, so I mean they're okay, but they spend most of their life dead. You're not really going to care. The best unit in the Arcane roster is probably the Spell Shield. This unit is actually the good one. Coming in with 80 HP, 5 defense, and 2 resistance. For a tier 2 unit, it's quite tanky. Maybe not as tanky as the other units, but it comes by default mounted, so it's very fast. It has a shield, so it's going to be tanky. 2 resist, so it's not inherently super weak to magic, but most tier 2 shield units, I think, in fact, don't all tier 2 shield units have some sort of resist? Yeah, they do. So it's not as tanky as the Feudal Defender, but its unique ability here more than makes up for it. It is an ability on a 2-turn cooldown, so every 3 turns, you have a 60% chance to stun all adjacent enemies. This allows this unit to sprint into the enemy front line, go for stuns on them, and then be decently tanky when it tries to get hit back. That means that if it does hit stuns, it doesn't get hit back. And on average, if you try to stun 2 enemies, if they don't have status resist, you'll stun at least 1 of them. The big advantage here is then your range units get to absolutely plow through the enemies because, you know, the enemies are stunned and can't fight back for 1 turn. It's a pretty good unit. Most people like it. It's a bit squishier than other shield units, but being a shield unit, it's already pretty tanky by default, right? So really no issue with the spell shield. Soother it's just a generic healing unit. It has a 2-turn cooldown. It heals 1 unit for 20 HP, then it heals another unit for 20 HP. Its unique ability is Cosmic Blast. You do 15 damage, which is decent. Yeah. While this unit is in battle, spells are 20% cheaper to cast. Does not stack. You want at least 1 of them in the field, but other than that, it's not... sorry, my nose. It's just... other than just you want 1 in 1 of your stacks, it's not that amazing. Soothing Breeze can be okay, but like it's not AoE, but it's also not single target. It's generally you want one. One in all your armies is fine, no more than one. Now the tier 3 units are slightly different depending on which of them you take. I generally don't see anyone take any of them because most of the time if people are playing Mystic, then they have their own tier 3 units that they're going to get that they chose through tomes. So here we have the Summoner, which you'll never see because Mystic Summoner will never build a tier 3 unit. They'll always use their magic units. It does 20 damage single target, so I mean pretty high damage. This ability transforms into a spirit summon based on the affinity of the last cast spell. So you can summon a little spirit dude down on the field. It's okay. Link with the target friendly magic origin. While active, target gains +2 retaliation attacks, +30 accuracy, and frenzy. So it can be okay if like you found like if you got like a early tier 5 magic origin unit. You can use Astral Bond, give it huge retaliation attacks. It runs into the front line. It now has 3 retaliations, and it gets more damage each hit. It's okay, I guess. And that's it. It's not... generally speaking, if you're playing Mystic Summoners, you're using 5 summons. Okay, now this is the one that can apply Dissonant. It's got 12 damage, not too high. Weaver's Overchannel allows you to cast an additional spell this turn. A player can only use 1 Overchannel effect each turn. This one can be okay because you can cast another spell, but the only problem with this dude, is he's not really needed. I mean, he's good, but he's not really needed. It's kind of complicated, but he's okay. I'm not saying he's bad. You probably want a couple. It gives you combat casting points each turn, which can allow you to keep casting spells. The only problem is that when you're in the dark tree, which most of the time you'll have dark, you get combat casting points for each unit kill you get anyway, which generally allows you to cast as much as you want. Now, I guess if you don't go dark, you could go this unit to allow you to get more combat casting points. So I could see a world where you could get a lot of spell weavers and just spam spells on enemies. It's certainly a strategy. It could be fun. It's not bad. I just haven't really seen anyone do it in quite some time. I've seen some people use them and I was never really that amazed, but you know, I could be wrong. And maybe I am wrong. Maybe the spell weaver is amazing. Spellbreaker, I think is just a generic. Yeah, this is just, I wouldn't say generic. He gives you 10 combat casting points flat. His AoE does 18 damage, so it's okay, but it's not exactly amazing. A lot of other AoEs will do more damage, but it does make all enemies lose all their buffs, so it's a complete dispel, which can be pretty good in certain situations. Let's say if you're fighting Industrious. It also deals double damage to magic origin units, so it can be like a soft counter to maybe Mystic Summoners. Cosmic Bolts also can dispel enemies and remove their buffs. Overall, once again, it's just not wowing me. I think if you get Mystic to tier 3, you'll just use some other units. You'll probably be using something like a Pyromancer or something. I don't know. He's like decently tanky for a battle mage. So honestly, maybe I'm just horribly underestimating these units. I don't know. So in total then, oh my god, dude, I swear to god, Kitty got a cat hair in my nose. So overall, let's go think here for a second then. What would I call the overall tier list? Well, let's close out of this. Age of Wonders hates being closed, but let's open into this. What would I call each unit? Okay, so here's how I organize a tier list like this. I'm very professional, thank you. I'm a very professional YouTuber. So we got S+, I would call Mystic Summoning. S, I would call High and Mystic Attunement. Mystic Attunement just adds a lot of damage across the board. That damage can be hard to resist because it's magic damage. And then just generally, it's just Starblades can just be quite powerful. I can't quite put my finger on it, why Starblades is so strong. It just can end up being so strong. I don't know a better way to put it. Then at A tier, we got Barbarian because they have huge map control. Their early game roster is pretty good and allows them to clear everything. It's very strong. Then I would say Primal, Crow, Mammoth, and Wolf are up here. I haven't personally gotten them to work well, but I've seen other people get them to work well, and they're generally rated highly. So I am trying to practice with them. Then, and this might be ranking it too high, so take this with a grain of salt. Then I would say Oathsworn, Harmony, and Strife could be up here. Now, maybe I'm rating this too highly. Maybe these should be over here. I don't know. Maybe this would be a better way to put them. I think in all honesty, this is probably a better placement for them. There are some really strong things they can do. They do take a bit of time to get going. Strife can get countered very easily, and you can make mistakes and kind of get turned off. Harmony takes a... Harmony? No, I don't. This is not the right one. I meant this. How did I do that wrong? I meant Righteousness. So Righteousness and Strife can be very strong, but Strife can be mistaken, and Righteousness takes a lot of time to get going. Mystic Potential can be strong, but it's very hard to play, easy to screw up, and, you know, honestly, it's just, why would you put that much effort into it when you could just play Mystic Attunement? I guess if you just want to play something harder and you don't want to play something borderline overpowered, then you could go with Mystic Potential, I guess. Oathsworn, Harmony, I just don't rate them very highly. I don't think they're good. Reaver, I think, is better than these guys just because there are some unique and funny things you can do with them. Now, E or Dark, I just don't... I think Dark is just completely destroyed by having such a weak early game. And then Primal Spider, as I mentioned, it just ints you by forcing you underground. And Serpent... I feel like I'm forgetting one here. Yeah, Dune Serpent. Dune Serpent puts you in the sand, which is really bad. I feel like I definitely forgot one of the primals. Yeah, Sabretooth. Okay. Okay, there we go. I forgot two of the primals here. My bad. So I would say Sabretooth is up here because he doesn't get as hard inted by Serpent. Sand Serpent only generates 2 gold. Sabretooth generates 3 gold. Sand is just generally awful, whereas Ash Terrain does actually have some synergies that later on you can use. But overall, I just don't... Like, both of these just... You run such a high risk of inting your run. Crocodile... Like, I've used Crocodile, and I just don't know what... I did so bad with it, I just didn't know what was going on. And lastly, Feudal, because Feudal has nothing going for it. It's terrible. It is nothing good about it. It's unplayable trash. I desperately wish the developers to give Feudal some actual significant buffs, because their unit roster is boring. Aesthetically, people like them. They like the idea of just being human fighter. They just want to be medieval humans, right? They just want to be that. But Feudal is so bad right now that it's one of the... I think it's literally the only culture that I don't think could ever win a game, no matter how lucky they got against any of the real cultures. So there we go. That's all the cultures. That's me going through all of them. That's me talking about all of them. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Make sure to like. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment down below on any of your thoughts. If you actually made it through all this and me sniffing and generally being uncomfortable for like 2 hours because I have a cat hair in my nose, thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.